Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 5-game baseball slate on DraftKings and a 6-game slate on FanDuel. Now the difference here is that the FanDuel slate has the Oakland Tampa Bay game, and the DraftKings doesn't. I do have some core plays: Clayton Kershaw, Keibert Ruiz, and Luis Garcia here on DraftKings, and on FanDuel I have Luis Garcia, Yandy Diaz, Randy Arozarena, and JD Martinez. So do keep those things in mind here. With that said, let's go ahead and get into our starters, our pitchers and stuff. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get into this now. First for DraftKings, obviously. So we're going to take a look at Brendan Woodruff here. Now, he has some good upside in this matchup. It is a tougher matchup than some of the other aces on the slate. There's really just two aces for that matter. It's Woodruff and Kershaw. And both of them have good K rates, but Woodruff doesn't have the best matchup compared to Kershaw when it comes to he's facing St. Louis's, hitting the ball pretty well. But he's viable since he's the third best option on the slate. Or since the third best option, on the slate is in a very ugly matchup as well. So he definitely draws value here. He is expensive though, so that is a concern, but he is somebody that you can definitely roster on this slate. Clayton Kershaw is a core play here on DraftKings. I think he's a near must play simply because he's got one of the easier matchups for the expensive plays on the slate. He also started the season against Arizona. I don't necessarily expect him to get 31 fantasy points again, but I do think he can get in the mid-20s, and I think that will be definitely good on this particular slate. He does feel safer than Woodruff, also doing his K upside, and he's been more consistent last season and this year so far, so he's also got better metrics against lefties and righties than Woodruff does. So that's definitely an advantage in this perspective, which is why I think he's a core play today. Again, don't read in too much to the fact that he scored 31 fantasy points against Arizona already. It is tough to do the same thing 2 games in a row, but he does have some good upside here. Then we're going to look at some little bit riskier plays and Patrick Sandoval. Now he's really my third favorite play catcher on the slate. He's also a little bit cheaper, but he is a little overpriced for this matchup against Toronto, who does have some really good hitters in this lineup. He is overpriced as for that, and he is somewhat of a streaky pitcher as well. He does have really good games, but he also had really bad ones throughout his season last year. It's kind of a 50-50 toss-up in this case. The matchup isn't super ideal because he's very bad against right-handed hitters, which Toronto has a bunch of. But he is somebody you have to consider on the slate with the limited options at pitcher. He's not a must-play by any stretch of imagination, though. I wish he was a little bit cheaper. That made him a little bit more useful. Then we're going to look at Chris Bassett for Toronto against the Angels. Now, this is a high risk here. He's not the best strikeout guy, and he does have some risk here, but he is a good value option off of Kershaw or Woodruff if you wanted to go a little bit cheaper here. Now, I will note that there's plenty of value throughout the hitters, and so you might even try to go Woodruff and Kershaw. Not super ideal to do that considering the fact that Woodruff is kind of streaky, but it is definitely doable. But Bassett is a way you could pay down a little bit at this position, but the real risk here is his strikeout stuff is not as good as most of the other guys here. And in fact, in his first game against St. Louis, he had no strikeouts, so do keep that in mind. And then for kind of a Hail Mary play, Mackenzie Gore, if you think Washington, Colorado could have that 1-0 game like they did yesterday, he might be worth taking a look at because he is actually a decent pitcher. He's not a great pitcher, but he's a decent pitcher. He does get some strikeouts, and so he does have a little bit of utility here, but he's not good against right-handed hitters, but the weather is not going to be in his favor at all in this game. And I do think the pitching is worse today for the Washington-Colorado game than it was yesterday. So let's go ahead and get into the catchers here. And obviously, Keibert Ruiz for Washington is in a great spot here. He's actually played pretty solid so far this season. He has hit a home run already. I do look for him to have potential home run in this game. He was a bit of a letdown yesterday, but that game had better pitching than this game does. And he's got a really good upside in this matchup. Alejandro Kirk is a very good option for Toronto. If you don't use Sandoval, he would definitely be somebody to take in consideration. He did sit out yesterday, which was somewhat annoying because he was my favorite catcher yesterday. but he's a good alternative to Ruiz, and he's pretty cheap as well. He's definitely rosterable on the slate. Then we'll look at Elias Diaz for Colorado. He is a Hail Mary option. He's high risk, high reward, obviously, here. If you think this game is going to stay low scoring and you want to avoid this game, then he would definitely be somebody to avoid. But if you think that the home runs are going to fly, then he would definitely be somebody to consider at this position. But he's not necessary considering the fact that Kirk and Ruiz are in the same price range. At first base, we're going to look at Shohei Ohtani. He is going to be somewhat hard to roster here at his massive price point, but he does have some upside here. He's hit 2 home runs this season. He is hitting the ball decently well, and he has some good metrics for this matchup here, but he is expensive, so he is a little bit harder to roster. Joey Menendez is $4,500, which is a pretty good price here at first base for today. He does have some good upside here, and he hasn't hit a home run yet this season, and I do feel like he's somewhat due. He has had some rough games, but he does have potential here in this nice plus matchup against a pitcher who is just very bad against players like him. And then for kind of a value play, Nelson Cruz. If the San Diego Padre game does play, this is going to be somebody you want to take a look at here. I should have mentioned at the top of the video that the San Diego-Atlanta game does have some weather concerns, and so you do want to be careful if you decide to roster anybody from that game, because that could be a rainout game. However, the game is early in the slate, so that does help us get that information before the slate locks. As for second base here, Luis Garcia is my top play at second base, and I really do like him today. I forgot I had him here in a core play. He's at just $3,300. He's got big time upside here. Now, he hasn't hit the ball particularly well so far this season, but he's only had a couple of strikeouts, and he has managed to get some hits in the last couple of games. He's got some good potential here, and he's got some power, so I do think he's a viable option. He also manages to score fantasy points in quite a few games, most of the time. There's a lot of players that, they can be kind of boom or bust, and he's kind of not in that situation where he tends to get at least a few fantasy points, even if he doesn't get a bunch, and that's better than nothing. Then we'll look at a good option from the San Diego game here, and Kim. He is a very interesting option. He is a little bit risky considering that game might not play, but he's hit the ball well so far this season. He's also had a home run, and he has some potential here in this matchup against a rookie pitcher who's not started off the season very well. Then for another a value option here is Whit Merrifield for Toronto. He's got some good upside in this matchup. He's a little bit high risk, high reward today, but he does look like a decent play here. Not as safe as Kim, but if the Padres game is rained out and you want to get away from Washington, then he is definitely a way to do that at second base. At third base, I do like Candelario again today. Now, he was a letdown yesterday, and he hasn't hit the ball particularly well so far this season, but he has some home run potential in this matchup, especially with Colorado being in such a high home run potential game, and with the weak pitching, he definitely draws some utility here. He is a little bit risky, but he is relatively cheap, and he helps you pay up for other players at other positions. Manny Machado is obviously a really good option. However, he is high risk, high reward in this situation. He's hitting the ball okay. He hasn't hit a home run yet. He could definitely do it in this matchup, and he definitely gives me vibes as a top tier option on the slate. Austin Riley is a good alternative to him if you want to pay up at this position. Assuming this game does play, he'll be a viable option and alternative to Machado. He's also hit the ball extremely well this year so far. Matt Chapman is a good value play if that game doesn't play. Take off of if you want to avoid the Washington-Colorado game. And then I'm also going to mention Montero for Colorado, who has some low upside in this matchup, being that it's a home game. He also did well yesterday with 3 hits, and I expect him to continue to hit the ball well when they're in Colorado. And he has some low-end high upside. So he is risky, but he's definitely viable on the slate. At shortstop, we're going to look at Bo Bichette. Now, he has home run potential in this game. He's hit extremely well so far this season. He's got a great matchup here, and I really think he's one of the top expensive plays on the slate when it comes to roster ability, especially considering his position is a little bit weaker than some of the others. CJ Abrams is a decent option for Washington. He's very high risk, high reward today as a value play. He's risky because he's not really a big home run hitter, and he's somewhat inconsistent, but I do think he has some utility on this matchup in a Washington stack. And then Xander Bogaerts for San Diego, very interesting today. He's hit the ball extremely well to start the season. He has 3 home runs already this year. I look for this game to be a situation where he could potentially have another one, and he's a good way to pay up at this position as well as a good alternative to Bichette if you want to get away from Bichette, assuming that San Diego game plays. In the outfield, we're going to start with Mookie Betts. Betts, who has some good upside here. He does play second base as well. I think second base has plenty of good value plays, though, so not to really want to risk him over there. But he has some utility here in the outfield. He's got as much upside as anybody on the slate, though he is priced up quite a bit, which makes him a little bit harder to roster. And he has hit the 1 home run so far this season. And he should have some opportunity to have another one on the slate. Hang on 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay. Then we're going to look at Chris Bryant. Obviously, Ohtani can also play at this position, so do keep that in mind as well. Chris Bryant is also an interesting play, and he's a little bit less expensive. He hasn't hit a home run yet, which is nice. He also has a hit in every single game so far this season, so that's really nice as well. And he's got a nice plus matchup against Washington and a pitcher that he should be able to smash on. And he is a home run potential hitter today. He's probably one of the guys I think has the best shot outside of shortstop of a home run situation, so he really draws me in for the home run situation here. Then we'll look at Jurkison Profar, who's a good value play for Colorado. He hasn't hit the ball so well so far this season, but we do know that he does have home run potential, and he is a decent hitter most of the time. He also gets stolen bases occasionally, and he really just hasn't had the opportunity yet this season, but this is a great matchup for him to potentially break out and do some good stuff. JD Martinez, I really wish he was a little bit cheaper here on DraftKings. He's very nicely priced on FanDuel. He has home run potential in this game. He's got a good matchup, and he has some good upside here. He's a little bit riskier due to the price, but I do like him in this situation. Then we're going to look at Michael Harris. Now, he is a little bit risky because he may end up sitting today, but if he does draw the start, all the metrics look like he's in a great spot to potentially hit his first home run on the season. Then we're going to look at Lane Thomas for Washington, who's also in a really good spot here, though the metrics for this game don't really play in his favor, but I still think he has the potential to get some base hits and stuff in this one. I wouldn't necessarily expect a home run from him on this particular slate, so he does kind of draw the slate as a Hail Mary option, but he is still useful. Trace Thompson for the Dodgers looks like he's a very underpriced play for this slate. He started the season extremely well. He hit 3 home runs in a game in his first game of the season, and while he hasn't started but 2 games so far this year, he's pinch hit a couple times, and he does strike out some. He does have some high end Hail Mary potential here, and a nice plus matchup against Bumgarner. If he draws a start, he would definitely be somebody I would consider rostering. And then finally, Chris Taylor. He's a little bit more expensive, and he's been inconsistent so far this season, but his price is cheap enough that he's worth taking a look at on this slate. That's what I have for DraftKings. Let's go ahead and move over to FanDuel. Like I said over here on FanDuel, we do have a little bit more of we added this extra game in the Oakland Tampa Bay game to consider here. So that does open up some more opportunity here. As for the pitchers, there's really only 2 guys I think that are viable on this particular slate because we do want to score 40 to 50 fantasy points, and that's Woodruff and Kershaw. And both of those 2 guys have really good metrics here. However, Woodruff does have the tougher matchup, so I do lean on Kershaw on this one. He also started the season against Arizona where he had 52 fantasy points. As long as he can get the strikeouts, even if he gives up a couple of earned runs, he should be okay in this slate. And then, if you want to do contrarian and go to Woodruff, that's definitely doable here. He has some good upside. He's pitched well so far this season, but he is a little bit riskier just because he's against a tough situation in St. Louis, who has a lot of good hitters. As for the first baseman and catchers, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of go here today, because basically we have Ruiz here as a catcher. Now, I don't usually like to use catchers on FanDuel that much because they're kind of a boomer bust plays more so. and obviously on DraftKings you have to use one. But he is definitely viable on the slate. Candelario is also somebody that's worth taking a look at here. He's cheap enough that he has some nice value in this situation where he's got a plus matchup here against Colorado's really negative pitching. I also like Joey Menendez, and he has some good utility here, though he's a little bit priced up on this site, which makes him a little bit harder to roster, which is a little bit annoying. But he does have some utility on this slate, but not as safe as some of them. And then Yandy Diaz, who I actually have at third base here, but he can play first or third, and I really like him today. And he's a guy that is in that Oakland-Tampa Bay game, which we're not going to get on DraftKings, but he has some really good utility, and you can throw him at first, third, or utility on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at second base, and we're going to start with Luis Garcia. Now, he can play second base or shortstop, and that definitely gives him some upside. I really like the matchup for him. Despite the fact he hasn't hit the ball well yet this season, he definitely just screams really good upside here. Then we're going to look at Chris Taylor, who has all sorts of possibilities, and he's also very low priced, which helps you roster him with the expensive pitcher, or roster the guys you want with an expensive pitcher. He has some high end upside in this matchup. He's kind of a boomer bust play, but he is cheap and he has utility, and that's nice. Then Kim for San Diego. If this game plays, he definitely is somebody that would try to fit in, and is a good alternative to Chris Taylor if that game does play. He has some really good upside in this matchup, and he's played well so far this season. And then Whit Merrifield for Toronto. He's a good value play if you want to avoid those other guys. He'd be a good way to get away from the Washington game and also the San Diego game. At third base, we're going to look at Candelario, who I already mentioned. Manny Machado, he can play third base, and he's priced pretty fairly on this slate. He hasn't hit a home run yet this season, but he is due, and I look for this game to be a situation where he definitely has the potential to do so. Yandy Diaz, who I mentioned at first base, he can also play third base, and he's definitely a core play on the slate. Matt Chapman, also very interesting today. He's priced a little bit cheaper, which definitely makes him viable. He's also just hit the ball extremely well so far this season. I think he's in a great spot, and he's got a good matchup, and he's definitely worth taking a look at. As shortstop, we're going to look at Luis Garcia, who I already mentioned as well at second base. He can also play shortstop. He's not a bad guy to actually utilize there if you want to pay down for another guy like Chris Taylor or Kim. But if you want to pay up here, this is not a bad place to do it with Bo Bichette at $3,700. He has some nice upside in this matchup, and he's priced pretty fair for that potential. Xander Bogaerts is a good play off of him, nearly the same price, and has just as much upside as Bichette does. And then Profar, who can play shortstop or outfield, he has some good utility as a value play at this position, and in the outfield as well, for that matter. And then in the outfield, obviously, Ohtani is a great play on the slate. He has big-time upside. He's priced okay here on FanDuel. Not ideal, but he is priced okay. Mookie Betts, also very interesting today. Has a good matchup here. I don't love the price, but I do think he's viable. I do really like Randy Arozarena. Sorry for butchering your name. I always mess it up. So he's started the season extremely well. He's got big time upside in this matchup, and I feel like he's a home run waiting to happen. I also feel similar for Chris Bryant. He's a little bit harder to roster than both of those two guys if you're going to pay for Bichette or somebody else or Machado, but he does have some nice upside in this matchup, and I definitely like him a lot on the slate as well. Then we'll look at Profar, who I already mentioned, JD Martinez. I really like him on the slate. He's pretty cheap here on FanDuel, which makes him very viable on the slate, and he started the season pretty solid. Nelson Cruz also has some utility here as a pretty inexpensive play, and he has some really nice upside. He's high risk, high reward, though, kind of near a Hail Mary play almost. Michael Harris, if he does draw the start and does play and this game goes, he would definitely be somebody to consider, but he is a little bit risky because he may have gotten hurt some yesterday and may not end up playing today. And then Manuel Margot, he's a guy that we can use from that Tampa Bay game, and he has some Hail Mary potential in this matchup. Lane Thomas, also a Hail Mary option here. He has been hitting the ball well, and while I don't think he's going to hit a home run today, I do think he has good base hitting potential. And then Trace Thompson, who is a guy I really like today. He's priced pretty fairly, and he has some low-end upside in this matchup. So he's only started 2 games, like I mentioned in the DraftKings aspect of the video. So we'll have to wait and see if he draws a start, but if he does, he's definitely somebody to consider on your slate. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.